As you've perhaps seen in the news, the focus squarely on Africa's political will, you might say, this Thursday. The continent's coming to terms with regime change in Tripoli, where the African Union's one of the African Union's past sponsors is being ousted, Colonel Gaddafi. And over in Addis Ababa, at the AU's headquarters, that's a donor conference taking place there, a conference for a famine that's killed tens of thousands in Somalia. True, only 4 heads of state showed up this Thursday, and aid pledges, well, a drop in the bucket compared to the needs estimated by the UN and other agencies. But it's not just about money. Neighboring states have taken in hundreds of thousands of refugees, and for 2 decades have now felt the fallout from continued lawlessness and fighting there. Whose job is it to feed the Somalis? And how do you go about doing it in a country where Islamist al-Shabaab militias are hostile to Western aid agencies? Well, France 24's James Andre went to Mogadishu to have a look and find out. We're going to see his exclusive report in a moment. In the France 24 debate, we'll be looking at the politics of recurring famine in Somalia, and we'll be talking about it with Billy O'Cadamary of sister station Radio France International, and also with Duncan McLean of MSF, Doctors Without Borders. Thanks for being here. And joining us by telephone from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, Fouad Maznai, the head of humanitarian affairs for the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for inviting us.
By the way, you can weigh in on the conversation on the France 24 Debate Facebook page and on Twitter, our handle @FrancoisF24. Without further ado, we're going to look at the nuts and bolts of what it means dealing with yet another major crisis. Some say the worst in 2 decades when it comes to famine. Here it is. For reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine, James Andre takes us to Mogadishu.
Danabo is washing clothes on the steps of Mogadishu Cathedral. She arrived here 10 days ago. She fled her village in an al-Shabaab-controlled district of South Somalia because there was nothing left to eat.
We had a farm and animals, but we've lost it all. Our children died of hunger. My brothers and my parents all died of hunger. We came here to save ourselves and to find a way to live.
Danabo is pregnant, but she walked for 32 days with her 4 children to escape the food shortage. She now lives in the nave of this cathedral, which has become a refugee camp. Humanitarian aid does not make it this far. Dozens of families lived crammed in amidst the ruins, in makeshift huts made of sticks and rags. Everyone here is hungry and malnourished. A measles epidemic has broken out.
We're weak, really weak. We have nothing to sleep on, nothing to cook with, nothing to eat. Our life here is very hard. We get stung by mosquitoes. We have no medicine. They haven't given us anything.
Like most of her neighbors, Danabo has fled a famine-stricken village for a war-torn capital. Mogadishu is one of the most dangerous places on the planet. 20 years of civil war have left the city in ruins. Going out without a flak jacket and an armed escort would be suicide. Just a few weeks ago, civilians were being caught in the crossfire of heavy fighting between the al-Shabaab militia and the forces loyal to the transitional federal government. Suddenly, on the 6th of August, the al-Shabaab insurgents surprisingly withdrew from Mogadishu. There is no more fighting in Baraka Market. This former al-Shabaab stronghold, once the economic center of the city, is now deserted. An eerie ghost town, it bears the scars of intense combat. The occasional passers-by have come to check on their houses for looters. This Radio Simba journalist lost a colleague during the battle.
You see the central reservation there? And the building marked Galad. Well, the sniper was up there. We were moving aid here, and my colleague was shot in the head, right here.
Since January, the drought has driven almost 100,000 people to seek refuge in this maelstrom. It's the only way to avoid starving to death. Badbado camp receives most new refugees. It was created by the Somali Transitional Government specifically to cope with this crisis. Nearly 30,000 people have arrived here. All of them have fled al-Shabaab-controlled areas where all humanitarian aid is banned. Like most people, Zainab had to sneak out of her village. Her situation in the camp isn't much better than it was in her village, but at least she is out of al-Shabaab's grasp.
We were afraid. They were killing us. We were afraid of being arrested. They took away our young boys and those of our animals that hadn't died from the drought. They stopped the aid workers who wanted to help us from coming here. How are we supposed to live like this?
Zainab receives some help in the camp, but she feels it's not enough.
They gave us dry rice and medicine. We have nothing else except water. Medicine just started arriving 2 days ago, but nothing has changed. There are no tents, no tarpaulins. Sometimes there's rice, sometimes there's none.
100 to 120 people arrive at Badbado camp every day, making the area increasingly hard to control. Despite the police effort, armed criminals from different clans cause havoc in parts of this huge Rak city. They steal food from the refugees to sell on. The weakest people, those like Halima, don't even manage to collect their food aid.
We cannot collect the food because of the armed men. They are stronger than us and they take the food by force.
On the 5th of August, the World Food Programme organized a large dry food distribution in Badbado camp. But the event turned into a gunfight. At least 10 refugees were killed, and the raiders left with 10 trucks, loaded with 300 tons of food. It was a severe blow for the humanitarian organizations.
There was a certain amount of trouble, and some of the food ended up being looted. It resulted in the very sad news that several people were killed. And that's just unacceptable. I mean, you're trying to help people. You're not trying to cause a situation, obviously, which can be taken advantage of. And that's why it's a very challenging environment. We are working on the best way we can get out, mitigating any risks to those who need the food.
At Mogadishu airport, planes keep landing, their holds full of food and medicine. The problem is getting these precious items distributed. Al-Shabaab has pulled out of Mogadishu, but foreign aid staff still can't operate out in the field.
Shabaab fighters are still in certain areas that we know about. They could well have quite a lot of weapons there, unexploded contraptions. So these areas remain very dangerous.
This ruined neighborhood used to be an Al-Shabaab stronghold. Just a few days ago, it was impossible to walk these streets. General Dago Badan, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Somali Army, is our guide.
This is mine.
The general is particularly proud of the fact he now controls Mogadishu Stadium, infamous for being the scene of public executions and amputations carried out by Al-Shabaab.
Before, we couldn't come here. Now we can. They didn't get out of their own free will. We fought for it. We showed them what we were capable of.
Like the rest of the city, the stadium was not captured by the army, but abandoned by Al-Shabaab. The insurgents claim it was a strategic retreat, marking a shift to guerrilla terror tactics. As he takes us to the front line, the general is full of praise for his men.
I think the army has shown its patriotism. They didn't have any shoes, any equipment, any camps, any hospitals, any beds, any houses. They fought out of pure patriotism.
The front line is now in the northeast of the city. This ruined building is being used as a makeshift fort by African Union forces and the Somali army.
We are firing from here. It protects us.
From here, they fire at Al-Shabaab insurgents entrenched around the former pasta factory a few hundred meters away.
Shabaab fighters are just behind this house.
Be quiet, don't say that. If we want to push forward, they won't be able to stop us. But we still have fighters behind us, so I want to flush them out before we move on.
The Somali army is known for being poorly trained and having a lack of discipline. Soldiers are only paid $100 a month, and some have even been caught looting. 2 were recently sentenced to death. Inda Ade is a warlord who used to control parts of the city. He's now allied to the transitional federal government, fighting Al-Shabaab, though he doesn't trust the Somali army.
They're hungry. We don't pay them enough. If we give them 20 cartridges, they'll sell 10 of them because they want to buy something to eat. And if he has to, a soldier will even sell his weapon. No one is going to ask him where it came from. No one checks.
International aid agencies are struggling to help the starving population. They have no choice but to rely on local partners.
Move back, move back. Everyone has to sit down. Move back, let the others sit down.
This food distribution point is managed by Jumbo, a local NGO that works with the World Food Programme. They feed 5,500 people a day.
Give it to the child. He's an orphan. I'll help him. He has lost both his parents.
The only way refugees can get food without violence breaking out is so-called wet feeding. Recipients collect ready-cooked food that has virtually no market value. The downside is that they have to queue for hours in the blazing sun to collect one single meal for their family.
We want dry food that we could cook at home, but we can't find any. What they cook here isn't edible. It's too dry, but we can't find raw food anywhere.
Again, the weakest refugees struggle to pick up their meal.
We bring food to where the most malnourished are living in the camp next door. We direct the most severe cases to the hospital in Banadir.
Banadir Hospital in central Mogadishu is overwhelmed. There are no available beds. Some patients wait for treatment on the floor. Dr. Walid El Haj works for an international NGO. He arrived from Sudan 3 days ago and has never seen such desperation.
No bed, no equipment, no others.
He spends his days examining emaciated children exhausted by famine and weeks spent on the road.
They are very ill patients and poor patients. Starvation, dehydration, malnutrition. This is a side effect of wars and other environmental factors.
Cholera and measles are widespread. Some children have contracted blood poisoning. A lot of them won't make it.
The first day we come, the doctors here said 6 patients. And today and yesterday 1 patient. Today no patient died, alhamdulillah.
Exhausted mothers turn an empty gaze, weakly brushing off the thousands of flies that swarm in this overcrowded hospital. Wada arrived in the Mogadishu camps a month ago. She failed to find any real help. Weakened by hunger, her child became ill.
We were in the refugee camps near the bridge. There was no help, nothing to eat. 5 days ago we moved to the new camp where they gave out food cards. Yesterday when they were handing them out, everyone was jostling. The others got hold of a card, but I didn't. There were 11 in my family and we haven't eaten in 5 days.
The doctors say Wada's child should survive. With Al-Shabaab pulling out, aid organizations hope to step up operations, unless insurgents carry out their threat to add a terror campaign to the rest of Mogadishu's miseries.
James Andre there, that report for the reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine. James, some compelling pictures and disturbing images. The woman at the beginning, the older woman, who says that she was afraid of Al-Shabaab. And then you see afterwards the woman who is in the camp who talks about how there's fighting going on there and she's afraid of armed men there. So really, what's the difference?
Well, it's very difficult to say. The thing is, Al-Shabaab have indeed
pulled out of the city for the time being. They had lost a lot of their power over the past few months because there's been a push by the AMISOM, who managed to free Bakara Market a few weeks ago, and that has taken a lot of money out of Al-Shabaab, because they used to, according to estimates, make
when you were with the
30
Somali
and
army,
60 millions.
When you were with the Somali army there, did you have the sense that they really were behind that wall just on the other side?
Oh, they definitely were. I mean, we actually heard shooting. They were there. The thing is, the general was trying to look tough, and the thing is, the Somali army has this rather, very bad reputation for looting and for all these incidents that have occurred with Somali soldiers. So. The thing is, he wanted to prove that they were the bosses, that they were holding the city, and that everything was fine. So he took us around. He showed us really parts of Mogadishu that haven't been seen by foreign journalists for years. But the fact of the matter is, he took us to the front line and said, yeah, we control everything and we're fine. And this is why I put that piece with the soldier who says they're right behind the house, because he was trying to convince us that they were actually a long way away and really afraid of coming, and close to this front line.
And the other tells him to be quiet.
Exactly. He'd even tried to tell us that you couldn't hear any shooting, and then we heard. No, okay. So yeah, he was on a PR stint to try and prove that the army was holding the city.
Duncan McLean, what struck you in that report?
All sorts of points. I think some of the obvious ones from the camps and the situation in which people find themselves. We can talk a little bit later, I suppose, about some of the more acute medical needs and what agencies, not just MSF, but many others, are trying to do to respond. But just on another point along the lines of what you were just describing, and especially at the end of the report, where if there's not a return to conflict in Mogadishu, the different tactics that have been threatened by the Al-Shabaab are actually are put in place, then aid agencies would be able to respond. And what strikes me very much now about the city is for me, it's not very clear that it's less dangerous today than what it was several weeks ago. Certainly to negotiate access to different areas has become more complex. The chances of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, compared to when there was a more clearly defined front, have certainly increased as well. So for me, it's not about having an opinion about what's good or bad about how the conflict evolves, but rather saying that it's certainly not going to get any easier in the weeks and months to come, given recent developments.
All right, and just very briefly before we go to the break, Fouad Maznai, the Somalis have seen it all over the last 2 decades, but this is really a grave situation.
To start, thank you very much for inviting me to shed light the OIC efforts in this international community's efforts to alleviate the suffering in Somalia and the Horn of Africa in general. Really, the working in Somalia as humanitarian actors is a very, very, very challenging situation. As everybody knows that the environment is not healthy. However, OIC, since its intervention early beginning of this year, in March, they have opened an office in a headquarters in Mogadishu.
Fouad Maznai, unfortunately, I'm going to have to interrupt you very briefly. We're going to have to take a quick break for a news update, and we'll be back. Stay with us. The France 24 debate continues.